Thank you for tuning in to the 3Cs. I'm Cleo Oliver, your host.
And I'm Cora Carey, your co-host. And this evening we have with us one of the people who work in this town hall, making it as beautiful as it can be, as well as other buildings that belong to the town of Greenburgh. I would like to introduce you to Sarah Bracey White, who is the Executive Director of Arts and Culture for the town of Greenburgh. She's from Sumter, South Carolina, and she and her husband have lived in Austin for the past 8 years. She's a librarian, a teacher, director of arts and culture in the town of Greenburgh, and the author of a poetry collection, Feelings Brought to Surface. And we would like her right now to tell us a little bit about herself, why she decided to write such a magnificent book, and what brought her to the town of Greenburgh.
Well, I was born in South Carolina, and I went to college in Baltimore. And I went to work for the mayor of Baltimore, and he discovered that I could write. Now, I was a librarian for the city. He discovered I could write, so I began to write resolutions and different kinds of things for the city council. He started to have me write speeches for him. So once I began to write speeches, I realized I didn't want to spend my life putting words in other people's mouths. I wanted to put them on paper. And I figured that if you're going to be a writer, you need to live in New York. So I left my good government job and came to New York and couldn't get a job. I was overqualified, they said, for everything. So I took a job as an administrative assistant to the president of a consulting firm, and he let me use his computers at night after work to write. So that's how I got started.
And plus you heard that Greenburgh was the most important place to live, right?
Paul knocked on my door during one of his early campaigns.
Okay.
And my husband, who's a Republican, said, "Oh, you want to talk to my wife?" So I told him what I'd been doing, and we talked. And later, after Madeline Gutman, who'd been director of arts and culture, died, they had an open call for the position interview. And my husband said to me, "Well, you should go because you'd be good at that." And I said, "I've not done anything in the arts." You're very creative. You'll figure out how to do it.
Right.
So I went and I won a second round of interviews, and I got the job 20 years ago.
Very good.
they
See,
made-
I was right. I was joking at first, but I didn't realize that's what happened.
That's
But that's
exactly.
great.
Yes.
They made
And it's been a wonderful job because I didn't have an agenda. I'm a workaholic. And I went out into the community and asked people what they were doing and how they saw this position. So I moved it from an observing of the arts to a productive creating of the arts. And I began to work with young people, middle-aged, seniors. And as people came to me with ideas, I bought into their ideas and used this as a platform to allow the community to express themselves in the arts and to appreciate it. And when they moved in this building, it was such a fabulous building, but it was a sterile building. It has lots of walls, has some interior offices with no windows. So I decided that if the people who worked at Reader's Digest could have fine art around them, that the people in Greenburgh who worked here should have it. So I began to exhibit original art, and I went to every garage sale and estate sale and began to buy pictures and put them on the walls throughout the building. So now taxpayers come in and they think this is an art gallery. So they get to look at art when they come to file papers and things like that. And it's encouraging for me to help people express it. One of the best things that happened is I had a woman who was putting up pointillism, which is these small dots, and an elderly man came in and said, "I never can understand those pictures. I don't even look." Well, the artist was here. She took him around and began to explain how you look at pointillism. And when I heard him go, "Oh, that's a boat in there and a sun," it was marvelous because he'd been introduced to art. And I think that if we can bring that into people's lives, it helps us to work through the difficulties that we must deal with. It is just an expression of our interior.
Well, you were instrumental in having local artists display their beautiful artwork in the town hall the old town hall. Are you still, does that program still exist here?
Oh, yes. We have the main gallery. It's been named in memory of Madeline Gutman here on the first floor of Town Hall. But I kept getting so many people who wanted to display that I added the second floor gallery.
Okay.
I have a gallery in the back near the cafeteria. I've done things like the Woodlands High. Greenberg Central 7 has an annual exhibit of all their children's art. They've done it at the library, but we're more equipped to have it. So I had 108 pieces from it. So we annually do their show here, and they're from the kids in first and second grade up through the 12th graders. So people in the community, I keep the show up for probably 6 weeks. They get to come and see the creative work that children are doing in the school. So it's outside of the school and allows the community access in a different way than if it were just hanging in the schools.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, you also put art up in the library.
No, I don't do it in the library,
Okay.
but I do it at the Multipurpose Center.
Okay.
And I have a children's gallery at Theodore Young. I raised
Yes,
enough
I was
money to
gonna
put
ask
in
that.
lighting and gallery hanging, so we exhibit children's work or work that depicts children. And for a while, we even did it in the Greenberg Town Court. So we've become a real art mecca. We're an art and poetry mecca.
Very
Oh,
good.
okay, that sounds very good. You have your book, Feeling Brought to Surface. Why don't you explain to us a little bit about what the book is about, and maybe you could even, read a few excerpts from the book for us.
Well, Feelings Brought to Surface was published 34 years ago. It was my first book. I self-published it. It was a book of poetry. The book that I'm doing now is called Primary Lessons.
Oh, okay.
Feelings Brought to Surface, I was teaching in a college, and I was subbing for a friend who taught poetry. And as a teacher, one of the things I find is we lead by example. So we had all these poets in the classroom, and I would get them to share their work after they'd written it. So they began to ask me, well, what are you writing? And I couldn't ask them to share if I wasn't going to do the same. So I began to write. I was writing poetry because my life was not what I wanted it to be.
Oh, okay.
And when I began to get students asking, can I have a copy of that poem? It really speaks to me. And after you get asked that question enough, you figure, maybe I have the material for a book. So I put together a book, paid a lot of money because this was before electronic publishing, so I had typeset. And I had 1,000 copies printed, and I sold 900 copies of that book.
Wow. Where is it now?
It is on the internet now. It has been
Really?
sold out. You can't buy it. Well, it's interesting that I Googled myself as a part of this new book and discovered that that book that I sold for $10 is available from antique book dealers for $35.
Oh my goodness, isn't that interesting?
So a few people who bought copies have sold it across the years. So you can buy it from the international internet groups. But I'm not getting any money off it.
No, but that's very interesting. So your first book was Feelings Brought to Surface.
Yes.
And now your memoir
Yes.
is Primary Lessons.
Well, I had been writing fiction for years. I was president of the National Writers Union. I began these subgroups where you began to meet with other writers in your genre, and we would write, read to each other, critique. And what I discovered is that fiction wasn't selling for me. I worked in Vermont the summer of 1963, which is 50 years ago. And I had a very unhappy experience working as a chef's assistant at a very fancy girls' camp in Vermont. And one of my friends encouraged me to write about it, which is what writers do to get stuff out. I wrote the piece, submitted it to an anthology. It was picked up, put in a book called Children of the Dream, about your first experience as a black in an integrated society. And my piece and 12 others were selected from the book and sub-published in a book that became a textbook in California for children in crisis.
Wow.
So I began to get letters and all, and I'm saying, well, maybe I shouldn't be writing fiction. Maybe I should really be writing about my life. So 3 years ago, I took excerpts from that book because the book that's called fiction, it was called Carolina Love Song. It was actually 10% fiction and 90% truth, but I'm a Southern girl, and Southerners don't tell all their family business in public.
Right.
So I held back and didn't want to say how much of it was truth. Well, I finally, with encouragement from my husband and my stepdaughter, who built me a website and said, write down these stories you tell us. And they would post them, and people began to ask questions, and there was interest. So I took the true pieces from my fiction work, and that became the basis for this, the summer of '63. So I went back to my life and began to write about my life. And I wrote it because I was trying to make peace with my ambivalent feelings about my mother. I was born in Sumter, South Carolina. When I was 9 months old, my mother sent me to Philadelphia to live with her oldest sister who had no children. My parents were both school teachers, but my father got involved with the NAACP and lost his job because he refused to give the names of teachers at his school who had attended an NAACP meeting. And the school superintendent promised him he would never teach again in South Carolina, and he didn't. So he would leave home to find work. He couldn't find teaching work. He did manual labor. He'd be gone for a period of time and come back, and my mother had to continue teaching. Well, with a 9-month-old baby and school starting, there's no one to take care of me because the rest of my family had migrated north in the Great Migration. My mother refused to leave South Carolina as my father had. So here she is, and she sends me to Philadelphia. Well, I'm a happy camper in Philadelphia. I'm the original Black American princess. The sun gets up in the morning when I rise and goes to bed when I go to bed, or at least that's how I feel.
Right.
And what I discovered is my mother comes to get me when I'm 5, to bring me back with my 3 older sisters, and she's pregnant at the time. She may not have her husband all the time, but she's going to have her children. I am not happy in South Carolina. My aunt promised me, oh, you'll have your sisters to play with, you'll have a garden in the yard, you'll be perfectly happy. I decided that if I could get into school, learn to read and write, I will write her a letter and tell her it is not like she promised and she should come and get me. But that's how children feel.
Yeah,
I thought my
right,
aunt was the most powerful person in the world, and she just didn't understand that it wasn't nice there in South Carolina. I wasn't old enough for school, so I lied to the Catholic nuns around the corner at the Catholic school that I was really 6 and that my mother would bring the birth certificate as soon as she could find it. So they let me in school a year early. I learned to read and write, sent the letter to my aunt, and she said, your mother decides where you live. Sometimes we have to do things we don't like, make the best of it. So I decided that I wasn't going to love anybody but God, because all these adults were letting me down. I knew my mother was a mean lady because she took me away from my aunt, and I knew my aunt didn't love me because she let me go back to my mother. So children have these convoluted ideas about why things are happening, but they must make up a story, and that was my story. So I'm in school, loving God, going to Mass in the morning, saying my rosary, telling my mother, I have to leave space on the right-hand side for my guardian angel, and I can't eat meat on Friday. And Sister Mary Joseph said such and such. My mother said, those nuns aren't running my house. So she took me out of Catholic school and put me in public school. So that began my journey. I discovered reading, and books were my escape. I discovered a facility for writing. I had a pen pal in South Dakota for 5 or 6 years. She hated living in South Dakota as much as I hated living in South Carolina. So I began to see that the problems that children encounter cross cultures, they cross economic lines. Childhood is not always perfect like people like to think it is. And I managed to work my way through it because of school, because of the teachers who took an interest in me. I was not very close with my siblings, so I had this kind of alienation. I was different from them. I thought I was better than all these people in Sumter, South Carolina, because that's what my aunt told me. But I had to survive within the Jim Crow South, and it was not easy. My mother's job was to keep my mouth shut and from getting us killed with some of the things. We were in a department store one day, and in the Jim Crow South, you couldn't, if you were black, you waited until all the whites got waited on before they served you. And I said to the clerk, my mother is next. We've been waiting in line, and my mother slapped me. I saw that as a weakness on her part, and a white woman said, teach that girl to stay in her place. I was determined not to be in that place they wanted to put me. So I realized now my mother was trying to save my life. It was not that she was weak, it was that she accepted the Southern way of living. But I did not. So I was a real chore for my mother. The good part about it is this photo here. It was my debutante cotillion picture.
Oh.
And I had my debutante cotillion 2 weeks before my mother died.
Oh my.
So for me, it was a sense that I had fulfilled a dream for her. And it made me realize that even though I had been a chore to raise, and I'm still surprised I have any teeth left in my mouth, because I was always trying to tell her how to run her life. And she'd go, who's the mother and who's the child here? And I'd say, well, you don't seem to be doing so good on your own, so I've been reading these books. I'm going to tell you how you can.
Oh my gosh.
You really were a handful.
Oh, yes, I was a handful. And mind you, I'm the fourth daughter in my family.
Oh, okay. All right. So
But my oldest sister is 10 years older.
Oh, okay.
So she has grown up in this whole setting. She goes to college, so by the time I'm 15, I'm the only child home.
Okay.
So I'm the one, if I'm burdened with taking care of her, then I feel I can give her advice about how to live her life. She should divorce my absentee father. She's a pretty young woman, looking. She can get another husband who'll
You
stay
can
at
do
home.
better than this.
You can do better than this. My husband likes to say, "Your poor mother, your poor mother." I've always been this. And when I married, I took my husband to Philadelphia to meet my aunt and the neighbors on the street, and they said, you know, she's been talking like this ever since she learned to talk. I can see why she had trouble in the South.
I was just wondering, that's so interesting. I was really into that, but I want to ask you a question. When did you come down to earth and realize that the princess that you are is real,
But to deal with real life.
When I was living in South Carolina, there's a section in the book where I get off the train. I'm 5 years old. I get off the train. This taxi driver is giving us this tour of Sumter, since I'm talking all proper. And I'm asking, why are all these people talking so slow and talk funny down here? My sister's saying, shut up and sit back. And as I'm driving through town, I'm looking and I'm saying, why are those people lined up on the sidewalk? And my sister says, they're going in the movie. And the taxi driver says, yeah. So I ask, why aren't there any colored people in the movie line? And he says, well, they go around the side to sit in the balcony. And I'm saying, well, my uncle doesn't like climbing stairs. Can't he just go in on the first floor? And they say no, and I say, why? And they say, because that's the way it is. So we get to the house, and I get out. Mind you, I have come out of Philadelphia, where I'm living in a 4-bedroom row house in Philadelphia, got my own room. My mother is living in a 3-room house. All of the children have the middle room. What we consider the living room has my mother's bed in it, and the crib where this baby she's carrying is going to be, and we have a kitchen. We do not have hot water. My sister says we bathe on the weekend, take a bird bath, and I'm saying, what? And my mother sends me to wash my hands, and we have dinner. She's serving neck bones, and I go, I don't eat that. So can you imagine this? I'm 5 years old, and my sister like, it's good. My mother fries chicken after 2 days because I'm refusing to eat any meat. And she says to me, so you like that? I said, yes, I like the chicken, but I still don't like it here. So that had been my whole thing. And so that was when the princess decided. And the other part is when I write to my aunt and she writes back, she sends me a doll to appease me. So I knew very quickly life had changed for me, and that I had to make the best of it. And for me, education and books were the thing that saved me. I went into my mind. And that was just so good to give me a purpose. I became editor of my school newspaper, And this is when the princess comes full circle and comes back. I had a half-hour radio show with another student where we prepared the news of what was happening at the school and read it once a week on a live radio show.
Where was this
in South Carolina?
No, where was this? Middle school or high school?
This was high school.
Okay.
By the time I got to 10th and 11th grade. And those things made me realize that I could do. I had teachers who encouraged that. I was the MC for every program we had at school, the band concert, the choir concert, the spring dance recital. They put me into that kind of role. Teachers in the South identified what a child's strengths were. I could not sing, I could not play the piano, I did not do any of the other things. My mother wouldn't let me be a majorette and go to football games because she was keeping me safe and Southern. But the writing and the reading, I was able to make public presentations. So I built a network that allowed me to develop.
Now, I'm laughing because you remind me of my partner over here. She's a Southern belle too. And some of the things she tells me, kind of like, like what you're saying.
Yeah,
how
I can
you grew
identify
up. So
with
she
what
can
you're saying.
identify with
Yeah,
you, and I'm
right.
sitting here cracking up because I was brought up in a poor neighborhood with flip-flop shoes and the same dress every other day. So
Oh,
this
no.
is, and I'm sitting here cracking up because I say that this is people don't realize that there were those of us who were really in a princess mode
Right.
back in the day,
Right.
And I'm just wanting to ask if time is running, and I'd like just to hear a few little excerpts from your book, if you don't mind.
I'm going to give you one of my debutante cotillion because in it I recognize, now I've been selected, everybody doesn't get to go. There are 12 of them, the Delta Sigma Theta sponsors it. And it's the whole thing. You have a planning session where they teach you how to drink tea and that you cross your legs properly and you don't chew gum in public and all these things. They teach you how to be a lady. And my sister sent me the gown and all this, and I'm going to read you that piece. I've dressed. When the big day finally arrives, this is the day that the debutante cotillion takes place. When the big day finally arrives, I take a warm bath, then walk with Mama to Miss Reva's house to get our hair done. I'm glad it's winter so my curls won't revert to naps like they do when it's hot. Miss Reva shampoos both of us and I sit under the dryer while she hot curls Mama's hair. I can't hear what she's saying, but I can see Mama smiling and nodding. I imagine that Miss Reva is telling her how beautiful I've grown up to be, just like my sister Sandra. I've worn a garter belt, stockings, and Cuban heels since the Easter Sunday when I was 12, so I can easily walk in the white pumps that I step into just before carefully slipping my beautiful gown over my head. Mama zips it up, I spin before the mirror giddy with excitement. I bend forward so she can fasten the tiara in my hair. She then sprays my scent perfume over me, stands back, and smiles as I slide on my long gloves, grateful they will hide my ragged fingernails. She fastens the 3 pearl buttons on the inside palms and applies a full coat of red lipstick to my lips. Don't I look beautiful, I ask when she finishes. She nods. Pretty is as pretty does, then turns to finish dressing. I can't stop looking at myself in the mirror. Is that really me or am I dreaming? When Butch knocks at the door and Mama lets him in, the look in his eyes when I walk into the living room tells me that I'm not dreaming. You look like a fairy princess, he says, and I can't suppress a giggle because that's exactly how I feel. And you look like Prince Charming, I reply, admiring his black tuxedo and cummerbund. Then you'd better not kiss me, he says, or I might turn back into a frog. We both laugh. Are you ready, Mama? I ask, anxious to leave. Butch helps both of us on with our coats, and I carefully lift the hem of my gown as we walk out to his car. Mama sits in the back, and I sit next to him. I cannot stop smiling and try to keep my eyes straight ahead. Mama makes small talk, asking about Butch's mother and his brother and about his plans for college. She applauds his choice of South Carolina State as an affordable college where he'll get a good education. I don't agree, but keep quiet, anxious to savor the joy of the moment without saying anything to upset her. When Mrs. McCain announces they're ready to present us, we form a line according to height and march into the gymnasium. I suddenly get chills and begin to shake. At the back entrance, we're each handed a bouquet of red carnations tied with a wide red streamer that dangles below it. My bouquet dances in my hands. We hear the rhythm of a live band playing, but the guests are hidden from our view by the large stage that has been built to serve as our launching pad. One by one, Mrs. McCain sends us up the back stairs, onto the platform where we are to stand in the spotlight beneath a wooden trellis covered in red carnations. When it's my turn, she touches my shoulder and says, "Good luck." As I step into the spotlight, a warmth comes over me and my butterflies disappear. I lift my chin and stand tall, unmindful of Mama's frequent warning that the tallest tree always attracts lightning. This night, I feel invincible. I smile as Mrs. McCain has told us to do, but I couldn't have done anything else, even if I wanted to. I'm so happy I feel as if I could float down those 6 steps. A voice over the loudspeaker says, "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to present Miss Sarah Marie White, the youngest daughter of Roberta Bracey White and William Edward White." Flashbulbs pop as Mr. E.C. Jones, the local black photographer, snaps pictures from his perch high up on a ladder. I'm happy to have this moment commemorated. The voice continues. Sarah is 16 years old and a senior at Lincoln High School, where she is the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, a member of Quill and Scroll Honor Society, and an on-air school reporter for radio station WDXY. Sarah will attend Morgan State College in the fall. When the voice stops, I begin my descent toward Butch, who is waiting at the bottom step. Applause fills the air. When Butch takes my left hand, I bow to the audience and drop into a deep curtsy, holding it for as long as I can before straightening up and letting him lead me to my position in a semicircle beside the other girls. He stands behind me close enough so that I can feel his warm breath on my neck. When the last girl has been introduced and the lights in the gymnasium turned on, I search the audience for Mama and finally spot her at a table with friends, beaming.
Very good.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
That makes me want to buy. I'm going to buy your book. I'm going to buy your book.
I have to buy your book.
I am.
also.
I'm going to buy, and I'm going to
Yeah.
read it. I really am, because I like books like that. I like people's lives, to talk, because I know there's humor in here, and I'm waiting to read it so I
Well,
can
I've heard people
smile.
tell me they laugh and they cry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a little bit that too.
Yes.
Well,
But-
Sarah, we're so happy that you came on the show. I've enjoyed every moment of it, but we're running out of time.
Okay.
One
Thank you for
thing
having
I can
me.
say about you as a person and the audience, you have exemplified the fact that you have high self-esteem, and that's what we were taught.
Yes.
Some of us growing up, it wasn't such a thing as you can't do this or you were shy about certain things, and maybe that's where I got my boldness
Yes.
from. But anyway, we're so happy that you came.
Thank
and
you.
have,
Let me give them my website.
Yes, do that.
www.onmymind.org. www.onmymind.org. Thank you for visiting it.
Well,
Okay.
now we know why the arts and culture program here in Greenburgh has such class. And anytime anyone says to me, why do we have Miss Bracey White as our executive director of arts and culture, I'm going to say because she brings class and dignity
Right.
to the position. I am so glad you came.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Okay.
me.
Okay. It really was fun.
She didn't say good night, She's sitting here so mesmerized.